to the training provider, recruiting a training provider, talking to them about the programme, talking to them about the training plan, negotiating the costs along with the funding bands, signing of the apprenticeship agreements, the contracts, and the commitment stages. And then from the learner's point of view, they will be undertaking a series of introduction assessments, so initial assessments, and this can be looking at their maths, English and digital skills, can be looking at their existing knowledge, skills and behaviours, and we'll talk about that a little bit more around your existing staff. And they will be undertaking an induction to give them a thorough understanding of the expectations, what they are to expect through their learning journey, and what to expect from all parties. Once all that has been completed, once everybody is signed up, once the paperwork has been signed, the funding agreements have been drawn down and the funding has started, they will then move into their on-learning programme or on-programme learning. So each apprenticeship has a minimum length of stay. So an apprenticeship has to be a minimum of 12 months. An average of the engineering and science-based programmes are a minimum 18 months, but obviously a degree apprenticeship could be 5 years long. And this is the average time or the expected time that a learner takes to become competent. And during the programme, they will learn their knowledge and they will learn their skills and demonstrate their skills and their behavioural development as per the standard. They will have numerous learning interventions. These can take place through a college, through a training provider, through a university, depending on the model and the level of qualification they're undertaking. They will also have on-programme assessments, so somebody dedicated to their course will come out to the workplace and assess them. So this could be via an observation, they could have professional discussions, they could sit mock assessments or real assessments if there are qualifications alongside. And then they'll undertake progress reviews, so a requirement will be at least every 12 weeks they will have a formal review. And this will take place until they have reached the end of their skills, knowledge and behaviour development, and when they have ticked off everything that needs to be covered as per the standard. Once that's all finished, and once the learner has developed their skills, they're able to demonstrate their skills, and they are what we would deem competent, they will then start to have discussions about entering the gateway. So the gateway is a virtual gate that opens up to endpoint assessment. And before you can go through gateway, you will have a three-way conversation, the training provider, the employer, and the learner, most importantly, where there'll be a series of questions, there'll be discussions, there may be some mock assessments and some formal discussions to ensure that the learner has developed all the knowledge, skills and behaviours to be able to go through to endpoint assessment. Once that has been agreed, the gateway opens and endpoint assessment can take place. And this is where the apprenticeship standards differ from MVQs and apprenticeships in the past, where now apprenticeships are assessed via endpoint assessment. And this is a series of assessments which are all laid out in the formal assessment plan. And this could be a formal observation, a project, presentation, professional discussion, simulation, various different assessment methods that an independent endpoint assessment organisation will conduct with the learners, and they will make independent decisions and independent gradings as to where that learner is in the scale of competence. And they will then make their decision and award a grade and certificate, and that will be the end of the apprenticeship journey on that level for that learner. So I hope that makes sense for anybody that wasn't sure of the programme and how the apprenticeships run. So moving on to how the funding works. So in 2017, the government introduced the apprenticeship levy. So this is applicable for any company that pays over 3 million payroll. And they pay 0.5% a month, anything over the 3 million, into an electronic account. This money can then be used, and it's solely fundable for apprenticeship programmes for staff. And it's regarded as the levy pot. All monies are kept for 2 years, and companies can access their account by setting up a digital version of this. And there is a link, and I think Roger will put a link up in the chat box if anybody hasn't registered. Now, obviously, there's a discussion to be had as to who manages this. Some companies choose for their finance departments to manage the apprenticeship levy funding, or some companies go down a HR, L&D route, or a bit of a blended route as to who has access to this account. But it is really important that you manage the account, that you have access to the monies that are coming in. And obviously, when you're drawing down apprenticeship funding, when you're agreeing and making agreements with training providers, that you're also keeping a track that money is coming in and money is going out. And obviously, at the end of 2 years, the money will just drop off if it hasn't been used. If you're a company that doesn't have a payroll of and therefore you aren't eligible for the levy, or you don't have to pay into the levy, there is funding options for you, and there's multiple different funding options that are available. ESFA, so the Education and Skills Funding Agency, will fund apprenticeships, and you will be asked as an employer to contribute a 5% fee of the training costs, and the training costs are all linked to the funding bands that are allocated. There are a range of funding bands, and each standard has a different funding band. They range from £3,000 to £27,000. And again, there's lots more information on the Institute's website for that. And again, since April 2021, all apprenticeships are managed online through the apprenticeship account. So if you're maybe a company that had apprentices in the past but haven't had them for the last 18 months or so, you may not have a digital account. But now, if you were to enrol any new apprentices, you would need to register and would need to be set up on the digital service. Okay, so moving on to the next stage. So this is looking at who are apprenticeships for, and the next 2 slides we're going to have a look at early careers versus existing staff. So there are key similarities. There's going to be. There's only so many reasons why an apprenticeship and why, obviously why we use training. But looking at this for early careers, and this is where the perception piece comes in around apprenticeships traditionally, or in people's perception, is used as early careers. And yes, there is absolutely no doubt that it is used as an early careers tool, whether that be giving a young person an opportunity, so starting off in a career and coming into a business and earn while you learn, which is an excellent opportunity and a really good alternative to going to college or going to university. Supporting CPD, so you might have a member of staff that joined you in a maybe a hands-on introductory role and wants to develop and has got a bit of a plan of what they want to do, so to support that professional development. And that's kind of how I came into the world of apprenticeships and began my route upwards. Knew that I didn't want to necessarily go to university, but knew that I wanted to progress, and luckily had the support of my employer to undertake some apprenticeships a long time ago, but that kind of got me my certificates and got me my qualifications. Business growth plans. So if you know that you're a change in business and which businesses aren't changing at the moment, if there's growth opportunities or even new opportunities, is there new departments that are growing? And again, having people in a position to be able to move up the ladder and using that for your younger members of staff to get them ready for jobs of the future. But where the focus of our conversations today is around that upskilling piece. So again, you'll see those similarities. So CPD, using it as CPD. But what I wanted to focus on more was that alternative investment. I recently read, it was actually yesterday, I read a stat in a report that it was a LinkedIn workplace learning report from 2019 that stated that 94% of employees would stay longer at their company if they were invested in and if their careers were invested in, which I thought was a really good statistic to obviously give you all today. But companies are in a bit of a tricky position at the moment. There may not necessarily be a lot of cash flow. There might not necessarily be a lot of money to be able to invest in pay rises or be able to commit to promotions that then come with pay rises. So using apprenticeships as part of an alternative investment and selling the benefits and the career development and the investment that you would make as an employer to your staff through them learning. So one of the things, they don't necessarily understand the funding. So even if you aren't a levy payer, if you are a levy payer, you have already paid the money because you pay it into the levy pot. If you don't pay levy, you're still committing a 5% contribution towards the training, the 20% off the job. You are giving them time to develop their knowledge and their skills. So again, it's all about that alternative investment in staff and selling it as that alternative investment, and then understanding the opportunities that can come from that in the future. And then a big thing linked in with what I was talking about previously is those changing roles within departments, changing roles within business growth plans, changes in plans. Obviously, massive over the last couple of years in digital skills. So digital departments, are they growing? Have they got the staff that they need? Research and development, marketing, sales. Have your teams and have your existing teams got the staff that they need to be able to take the business forward in this ever-changing world? And using apprenticeships is something that businesses should be utilising and can utilise to be able to meet the succession planning and future-proofing for teams going into the next stage of your business. So section 2 is looking at challenges, and we all know that there are challenges. I can't promise I'm going to solve them all, but let's hope that again can kind of spark a bit of ideas and potential solutions that could support you and your business. So thank you for those that responded as part of the registration and gave me some food thought of the questions that was posed to you. I really appreciate your feedback. And one of the questions that I asked was around the barriers that you and your business have to using apprenticeships as an upskilling tool. And some of the common responses, and there was multiple responses, but the main themes that came out of it was that, one, employees are already established in roles, they're comfortable in roles, and they're happy in the role that they're in, which is fine. Perception is a massive one, and I mentioned it earlier on, and it's always something that comes up, that stereotype apprenticeships are for young, they're for new to industry, they're for school leavers, they're new to role, they're not for existing staff, and they're not to use as upskilling. And again, that's the perception piece. And then the 20% off the job, and that again, a bit of a perception piece, but also that known barrier of having it in your head that there is one day a week that you have to let one of your staff go and not do any work, and that productivity of that one day a week. So there's 3 of the most common responses, and they were repeated through your registration details. So thank you very much for sending them. So a few solution ideas, or at least some food for thought and some ideas. So something that I've used previously, internal marketing around the perception of apprenticeships. You don't have to call it an apprenticeship program. Now, one caveat that I will make is apprenticeships, being on an apprenticeship program is important that the learner knows that they are. So the candidate knows that they're on an apprenticeship program. This becomes important when they're potentially being interviewed. So if they're being interviewed as part of an Ofsted inspection, the training provider will not want them to hear feedback that the learners do not understand that they're on an apprenticeship program. But that doesn't mean that you have to sell it as an apprenticeship program when you're marketing your CPD, your talent programs internally. Once you market, once you get some interest from people, you will be expected to explain to them that they will be on an apprenticeship program, but it doesn't have to be marketed that way, which could be the bit that puts people off. And it's something that when I was at the employer provider that I worked at, it's something that we worked on, and we changed the names of our program so that apprenticeships weren't talked about straight away. So we wanted to attract attention before we then went into the detail. And once we had them hooked, the fact that it was on an apprenticeship program didn't really seem to matter to them anymore when they knew what they were going to get. Number 2, knowledge sharing. So a big thing and a big barrier can be with your team leaders and your departmental managers. If they've never had apprentices before, if they've never done apprenticeships before, if they've never known anybody that's done an apprenticeship before, they're not going to know about them. And, from a HR L&D point of view, it's important that you understand, the ins and outs of apprenticeships, but it's also important that team leaders and managers who are holding one-to-ones, is there an annual review process? Do people go through annual PDPs? It's important that team leaders and managers have some insight into options available to their staff as part of CPD and as part of ongoing development. So one of the things that I would recommend is, having some reading materials, some leadership briefings or some brief workshops, so that you can educate your team leaders and your managers, your people that are talking to your staff about their careers and about their development, and giving them some insight into options that are available to them. not expecting, team leaders or managers to have full understanding. They shouldn't be then signing learners up to apprenticeship, but at least being the people that can then pass you the leads and you can take over and then support, about educating your leaders so that they understand and have a bit more confidence around what an apprenticeship programme is. And then the other thing, which I hear time and time again, is about training providers and the models that training providers want learners, and the off-putting elements around provision. And what I will say, and I'll probably say this quite confidently, is there are enough training providers out there that you can find one that suits you and your needs, rather than you having to mould to their needs. Yes, there are some courses that suit a day release model. So, for example, in a laboratory or on a degree level that's run through university, there might be a need for them to have to go to university 1 day a week or college 1 day a week. And although training providers have been shut to the core through COVID, and in order to keep learning happening, they have adapted their training models, there will be some call where practical assessments, practical learnings will take place off-site. But there are lots of programs that don't need that. Lots of standards do not need your learners or your staff to dedicate 1 day a week. And it's about you building a model that suits you and a model that suits your learners. And it's also about understanding what actually constitutes the off-the-job learning. And again, this is where your training providers come in. There are multiple training providers out there. You don't just have to pick the one that's closest to you down the road that you've used before. The world is your oyster, and finding one that suits your needs and your that balances your business needs and your learners' needs and your staff's needs is more important than just picking one just because you've used them before or because they are closest to you. Okay, so following on from that, around the funding rules and the 20%, and it's the dreaded 20% off the job, which is kind of normally kind of the biggest barrier. And it's one of the things that, unfortunately, working with government and having conversations, it is an unfortunate red line. So every conversation that we have with Department of Education or any conversations that we're engaging with, it's one of the things that they are not going to budge on. So we have to make it work, and we are exploring flexibilities with them, and DfE are open to flexibilities, and there is some new programs that are coming out which are supporting flexible apprenticeships. But 20% off the job will always be a requirement, and it is historically dedicated to 1 day a week, because that makes sense. It's a fifth of their working week. But again, looking at 20%, so it is when an apprentice can dedicate their time as part of working outside of the normal working duties, and it's to give them a chance to be able to dedicate time to the learning against the standard that they're working towards. And I've just put a couple of questions and considerations for you to think about. So question 1 would be, does the activity have a link to the apprenticeship standard? So is it linked to the knowledge, skills and behaviours? And is the activity developing new knowledge, skills or behaviours? And if the answer is yes to those questions, then the rough rationale would be that it would be included in the 20% requirements. So therefore, you can think about it in a bit more of a flexible way. And I'll show you some examples on the next slide. But it doesn't just have to be that model of somebody leaving your workplace for 7.5 hours a week. So we've got some myths and some facts, and again, these are these are common either misconceptions or things that people don't always understand around the 20%. So one of the myths is that off the job must be delivered away from the workplace, and this is not the case. Off the job can be delivered in a flexible way that again suits everybody. Off the job means releasing my employee for a day a week. I hope I've said this enough in the 20 minutes I've been talking, but no, that is not the case. Yes, some programs, and I'm never going to be able to say that not all programs are going to be able to have a flexible model. Some do work, and some training providers and some employers, prefer the 1 day a week. They know that day, it's the same day every week for the whole academic year, and it suits, but that doesn't have to be the way it's delivered. Apprentices don't need to keep records of their training. This isn't true. A commitment statement is drawn up at the beginning of the programme, and all parties sign this. And this is a really important document There is a legal requirement for this commitment statement to be drawn up, but it should be a working document that's reviewed all the way through the programme. One, it outlines where the off-the-job will be covered, and this should be laid out at the beginning. And if you are working with training providers that aren't showing you where the off-the-job will be met at the beginning of the programme, then you should really consider how it's going to be covered, and to make sure that the learner is going to be able to demonstrate those 20% requirements. But also the commitment statement draws down exactly how the knowledge, skills and behaviours are going to be delivered. So the full training plan of when the teaching is going to happen, when the assessments are going to happen, so that you have a really clear picture in your head as to how your learner is going to progress. This might link into projects that you want the learner to undertake as part of their development, and you can plot out in your timelines when people can start to take on additional responsibilities to start to demonstrate the skills they are learning, and how that can then increase their productivity and really cement the work that they're doing and the impact that the apprenticeship programme is having. And again, that return on investment, showing the team managers that it's worthwhile, and and that you can really see the benefits of these candidates doing it. English and maths. So as part of an apprenticeship programme, if a candidate doesn't have their equivalent qualifications, they will be expected to complete up to a level 2 in functional skills. And the time that is dedicated to English and maths training is not included in the 20% off the job. So any additional teachings that they need, the mock assessments and the real assessments, will not be counted towards the off the job. So it's something over and above that needs to be counted in. And obviously conversations with training providers will need to take place, because if your learners do have specific needs, if their initial assessments are lower than their expectations, then that will have to be accounted for, and additional time will need to be given for that English and maths training. And then off the job should be completed in works time. And this is true. Again, we all know people that probably do things in their own work, but the off the job must be completed in their works time, because it is a work-based programme. We cannot expect our apprentices to be doing work in their own time. Obviously, if they want to go over and above, but the minimum expectations of the off the job requirements should be covered in works time. And that is something that you would need to obviously support your apprentices with. So just a little bit of an overview of some of the kind of activity that can take part and you can use. So this is where we're thinking about not necessarily just having the classroom teaching and not just having that 1 day a week model of learning. So we have our traditional attending classroom teaching and e-learning sessions, which of course count. They're pre-bookable, they should be planned in advance. And again, you would then get an attendance tick that you've attended that session, and those hours would then be counted. But you've also got occasions like coaching from trainers or workplace mentors. So if you've allocated your apprentice a mentor, and they have a regular catch-up where they're going through knowledge, skills and behaviours, whether they're having some coaching on some leadership skills, or whether they're having some development discussions on a technical instruction or work process or standard operating procedure or anything, again, that is new learning. So that can be counted, and that should be counted as off the job. Independent study, so if they are taking some time out to do their own research, again, they would count. Shadowing, so if there is a new piece of equipment or there is a new area of the shop floor, the department, the team that they've never worked with before, again, work shadowing, they are learning new skills, so why wouldn't it be counted? It's something new that they are learning, something that can be counted as off the job. Industry visits. And I'll link this with manufacturer training, because it's quite common with lots of businesses, is if people come in and want to train, there's a new piece of equipment to be trained, or there's a new initiative that's being used and you've got some outside guests coming in, again, new learning, new knowledge, new skills, new practical skills that they might be learning to then use a new piece of equipment, a new software, or a new technology, again, all counts. And then one of the things that I was just going to focus on was in terms of team meetings. So you might have learners, you might have apprentices that are taking leadership responsibilities, maybe running parts of projects, maybe taking some own responsibility, maybe mentoring a less experienced member of staff, or might be taking control of something. And they might be asked to report back to you, or they might be asked to report back to a team. If they've never run team meetings before, if they've never run a project before, if they've never been in charge of anything before, all of this is development, and all of this is counted as off the job. So just because it isn't official, it isn't necessarily in a classroom, it isn't reading a textbook, or it isn't doing a piece of work that is then going to be marked, doesn't mean it isn't off-the-job training. And it's really important that training providers understand the work that the learners are going to be doing in their workplace when you're planning the off-the-job. So part of reflection. So for example, you might run a team meeting for somebody for the first time, you might have a slot, so you've got time to prepare that meeting, you've got your maybe a slide deck that you prepare, you've got your speech that you prepare, you then carry out the meeting, and then afterwards you have some time with your mentor to reflect what went well, what didn't go so well, next steps, an action plan. All of that would be encompassing new learning and new feedback and new reflection that you would then put into the next stage of your development planning. And again, all of that can be counted. So I'm hoping it's just given a few ideas as to where off the job can be accounted for, and not just the traditional classroom teaching that some people do think about. And then the last stage, last thing I wanted to talk to you about, and a couple of ideas I just wanted to give you, is about succession planning. So how much thought is being given about 2 years, 5 years, 10 years into your business? Now, it does seem a long time away, but it does creep up on us. Considerations: do you have an aging workforce? Do you have departments where half the team could be retiring in the next 5 years? What happens then? Do those roles not exist anymore, or do you have a workforce that you can upskill and get ready? Younger employer work priorities: younger generations aren't as loyal. It's a fact that the newer generations aren't necessarily loyal to companies. They move around, they want to grow, they want to explore new things. So again, are you considering your existing workforce now and where your existing workforce could be or want to be in a few years' time? And changing business landscapes: is your industry on the verge of a revolution? It's COVID, green, net zero, all of those things that are happening that aren't going away and aren't going to change. Digital revolution, post-COVID, working from home or using new technologies. Are these considerations that you're making, and where does that leave your workforce, and where does that leave your skills gap? And that's the most important thing. So 2 models that I've used in the past: one used when teaching, so teaching leadership and management, but also I used this in my previous company that I worked in. We knew that we the people that are already there in the roles, and then people who would be ready, or potentially next steps would be to get there in the future. And I'm just going to talk you through potentially Wendy's situation. So she currently is in the production team, and she is on a line. And the thought for her is that she could be ready in the future to become a production supervisor. Eric Wilson is the person that's ready now, but Wendy could be ready in the future. So the consideration would be: do you wait for Eric to take over Matt's role if Matt leaves or if he changes? But what happens if Eric isn't there and then you haven't got anybody that's ready? So it's looking at your Wendy's and your Bob Greenwoods and your Kyle Carters and thinking about what do you need to do with them to get them ready to potentially take over and move up the ladder in the future without leaving a gap and without leaving departments at risk. And then I'll show you the wheel. So you're looking at, for example, stage 1, where you've got your production supervisor. So that's a critical role, and you obviously need to make sure that that role has always got somebody in the background that either can take over or be ready to take over in the future. So what does that person do in comparison to what does Wendy or Eric currently do? And where do those gaps then appear in the skill set? So by constructing a profile, so the skills that they need, the knowledge they need, do they need a formal qualification? Do they just need some leadership training? Do they know the role, but they don't know the leadership Do they know leadership but don't know the production process? And again, it's looking at where those potential gaps are. And then skip into stage 4, because you've already got your staff and you would hope that you have your staff. If you don't, then you'd need to obviously consult with HR about bringing externals in and potentially having them ready. But using your internal talent bank, you then look at development plans. So what's it going to take to get Wendy up to production supervisor? Well, she's worked in the industry, she's got the production knowledge, but she's never been a supervisor and she's never had any management experience. So you could look at potentially just getting her to shadow Matt, having a look at the bits that Eric does, and just, you know, quite granularly and quite slowly looking at development. Or do you plan for the future and talk to her about a level 3 team leader supervisor role, which would teach her in 12 months the fundamentals of leadership, management, how to run a team. She would have the underpinning knowledge. She would then be able to take some responsibility through the skills development and take on some project work. Maybe that would support Matt. Maybe he's got a development want that he wants to start to shadow Mary in quality management, or whatever his desires are, but to help her and help the team get ready for the future. And again, this is where you've then got your stage 5 and stage 6, where you're developing your back and you have a look at again. So once Wendy finishes her team leader supervisor, she's got the buzz for apprenticeships. She's wondering whether in the future she could then go into sales or she could then go into quality. So then do you look at, where is there a quality qualification? Could she have a look at the quality practitioner level 4? She's done a level 3. She's, you know, understood, and she's understood the commitment. Could she then commit, and would you then commit as an employer to get her upskilled even further? She could do the level 5 ops manager, and then she could be ready to be the quality manager or the sales manager in a number of years. And this is how that succession planning wheel can work. It's about having a look at what you've got, where are then the gaps, and what do we need to do to fill those gaps? And again, using apprenticeships and having a look at the knowledge, skills and behaviours that each role and each apprenticeship will give you, will then put you in a position where you can then start to use apprenticeships and have that as a tool to use in the future as part of your succession planning model. And I've just mentioned a couple of apprenticeships. There are over 600 that have been approved, which is an awful lot, but there's just a little bit of a wheel that we put together. This is focused more on manufacturing, but you'll see that there's a range of programs and a range of levels that are available. And again, this is literally just a snapshot, but you'll see that you've got your specific, you know, engineering. So you can start at your level 2 engineering operative and then move all the way up to systems engineer degree level. You've got your business admin, you know, your business admin level 2 or your customer service level 2, which then goes into customer service 3, admin 3. You've then got your team leader supervisor. You could then specialise. So you may come in at business admin 2 and then want to go into improvement and continuous improvement, and could move across to improvement technician, or you might get health and safety buzz. The world's your oyster once you're kind of in the circle, and once you start to have a look at what is out there for you. But again, there is over 600 approved standards available through the Institute's website. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the content that I wanted to deliver. I'll hand you back over to Roger for if there's any questions. I've seen there's a few bits that have come up in the chat box, so I'll have a quick look at them. I hope you found it useful. I hope there's been some snippets of kind of the information that I've got and the experience that I've got. And Roger will talk you through next steps and talk you about the workshop that is available, which delves into more details.
Excellent. Look, thanks, thanks, Rachel. I'll definitely let you get your breath back there. So lots of stuff to go through and lots of food for thought, I'm sure, for people on today's session. Look, as Rachel mentioned, Q&A time, really. I've seen some questions come through, so that's great. There's still time left if you want to get some questions through to Rachel. We'll try and get through as many as we can today. Any that we don't get through in this session, we can pick up separately afterwards, perhaps. Okay, so Rachel mentioned a workshop session, and sort of clunkily try to post those in the chat box. I hope you can see those. But so there's a member, this is exclusively for SIP members, but there is a workshop taking place, Apprenticeships for your existing workforce, on the 29th of June. There's a link there. And again, there's also a workshop around careers outreach support as well for your business taking place on the 24th of June. So both of those are for SIP members. And the idea behind those are the much smaller, sort of more informal, bit more interactive, sort of consultancy type sessions, really, with lots of hands-on practical support for you and your businesses there. So look, just before I dive into the Q&A as well, I should say that for those who sort of on completion of this this webinar, so this has been recorded, and we'll get a copy of the slide deck out to you as well, and also there'll be a short sort of I think 2-question survey as well, so your views and feedback on this session would be greatly appreciated. Okay, Rachel, if you're still there, let's go through.
Yeah.
Well, I'm relieved. Let's go through the Q&A. So someone's asking first of all about where they can find more information on just the breadth and the range of apprenticeships that are out there, really.
Yeah, of course. So the Institute of Apprenticeships is where all of the information sits. So we can either post out a link, or I can send the link out afterwards. The apprenticeships are overseen by the Institute, and on their website they've got all the information that you would need. They have things you can type in, a name of a standard if you know it, or another way to start from scratch is to have a look. And when you go onto their website, you'll see a tab that's called occupational maps, and all the standards are split into different routes, whether that be health and science, engineering, digital, and in there you can find different maps which will structure out from level 2 up to level 7 the standards that are available.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Rachel, for that. And okay, the next question here is I think there's a couple of questions actually on the same theme, but how much time does it take to get an apprenticeship started?
Good question. I've seen that, again, there's also a question from Petra relating to apprenticeship contracts and when things start and the official start dates and things. It all depends on how you're going down. So if you are recruiting a brand new recruit, a brand new start, then if they're starting with no or very little knowledge, skills and behaviours, and you're starting them from scratch, then obviously ideally starting them when a course is starting would be good. But that obviously isn't the case for existing staff. They're already in place. Paperwork and things, it can be as quick or as slow as you want it to be. Apprenticeships will have monthly targets, as I'm sure you will do. So it can happen very quickly if all the paperwork is agreed, but it will likely depend on the training plan, the delivery plan that's agreed. So for example, if you're wanting an existing member of staff to potentially start a degree apprenticeship, that will fall in line with when the university or when the provider is having their next intake of cohort. So whether that be an annual September start, whether it's a September and January model, whether it's a quarterly model, and that will depend on the provider that you want to work with. More generic qualifications and more generic national training providers will probably run roll on, roll off. So you can, join, especially if there isn't a formal classroom delivery plan for your learners. So they can normally join whenever they want to. One of the things that I will say though, and again, this is where this time frame comes in, if you've got an existing member of staff that's been in a role and they are going to be upskilling as part of an apprenticeship, they must, or the training provider must, take into consideration their prior experience and their prior learning. And this is where the rule around the minimum 12-month comes in, because if you've got a member of staff that has got some skills, knowledge and behaviour, they don't need to do the full knowledge, skills and behaviours of an apprenticeship. They don't need to learn what they already know. So it's really important that working with training providers, you and the learner undertake a really detailed initial assessment at the beginning and determine what they've already got and then what they need. As long as what they need is going to cover over 12 months, that will fall into an apprenticeship. It doesn't necessarily mean it will be the full time. So they might not need the 18 months, they might need 15 months. And again, that's where then conversations happen around the funding bands and the training costs, because if they're not needing all the learning, you shouldn't be spending all of the levy on the funding band. But just a bit of a hint.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks for that. I've mentioned SIP membership a couple of times, so I've posted another link again on the chat box, just about more information on SIP membership, if that's something that you feel might be of interest to you. Okay, next question, Rachel, is around someone's training provider isn't currently tracking 20% off the job hours, do I have a responsibility to do it?
So officially, it is the responsibility of the training provider. They are the ones that are formally audited by ESFA. But yes, there is a responsibility for the learners and therefore you as the employer to be tracking and making sure that the learner is working towards their 20%. Just because you are, I think one of the things to remember is you are using government funding to pay for the apprenticeships, even though it's your money through the levy. And that can be quite hard to get your head around. But you pay it into a pot and then it is paid through an official government source. So therefore there are strict funding rules. And if you ever need help going to sleep, please download the funding rules and it'll help you fall asleep. But it is really, really important that you are taking control and you're taking some responsibility for it. So yes, although it is the training provider's overall responsibility to track, it is the learner and therefore your responsibility to be a part of that tracking process. And it should be something that's reviewed at every progress review, and an action plan should be put in place if the hours are slipping or if there isn't a forward plan of how all the off the job is going to be met by the end of the programme. If there are any concerns, the training provider should take the lead and put together an action plan to ensure that those hours are met.
Excellent. Thanks, Rachel. I think we're just about there for our time slot for today. Really, I think we've going through the questions, Rachel. I think we've answered most of the questions that there. Can't see any at the moment that we've left unanswered. So look, that just leaves me just about time to say thanks, Rachel, for taking us through that. Hopefully, it's really useful for people on today's session. Thanks everyone for attending this session. Hope you found it useful. Again, please let us know your views in the sort of feedback survey that will come out following this session. Again, copy the recording, copy of the slides we'll send over to you separately, and also the links to some of the things that Rachel mentioned, including the next SIP member workshop, Apprenticeships for your existing workforce. Thank you, Rachel. It's up on screen now, taking place on the 29th of June. And also as well, we'll send over some contacts details for Rachel as well. I'm sure, hopefully, Rachel, you don't mind SIP members getting in contact with you and chatting through any concerns around apprenticeships they may have also. So look, thanks everyone, and I wish you all a great afternoon. Thank you.